this episode of the DTVC Extra podcast, we're going to be looking at the second season of Daredevil Born Again, or what I like to think of as the second part of the first season, because it doesn't really feel like a second season. But anyway, we'll be talking about that. I will also be talking about the kind of the Punisher one-shot, One Last Kill. So that'll be in the second segment. And then in the third segment, we'll be talking about my book, Nadia and Aidan, which came out in 2024. So stay tuned for that as well. But why don't we just dive right in here on Daredevil Born Again, season 2 or part 2 of season 1, whatever we want to call it. I'm a little late to the party on that, obviously. And I do have an explanation for why I'm late to the party. I did watch the first episode of part 2 of season 1 when it came out. So it was pretty close to when it came out anyway. And I think it was like within 24 hours when it came out. But I watched it and I was like, I don't know if I have the energy to do more. Kingpin is omnipotent. He always knows what's going to happen before it happens. He's always taking people out before they have a chance to get him. And eventually, maybe around the end of the season, maybe Daredevil will prevail if we're lucky. I don't know if I didn't have the energy for that. So when the second episode of that season came out that next week, I kind of like, oh, maybe I'll watch it. I should probably get to it at some point. And next thing I knew, it was like July, and I hadn't watched anything other than that first episode. And then, I'd gotten caught up on movies for the site, for the podcast. Also, gotten caught up on some of the writing I was proofreading. So I had a little time, and I was like, you know what? Why don't I get back into that second or part 2 of season 1 of Daredevil Born Again, and kind of see if I can finish that off, and maybe make a podcast episode out of it. And the other mindset I had was, I thought it might help me fall asleep. It was like, I don't know, 10 o'clock at night-ish, something like that. And I was like, all right, let me watch this. And once I drift off, I can kind of pick it up later or something. The thing I didn't realize was that the jerk factor, the rage bait factor of this part 2 of season 1 was so high that my blood pressure was just, at like a, I don't know. It's like I was at attention the whole. I don't know what to say. I was like, my blood was boiling. I was like angry all the time. Kind of the way like rage bait is on social media, right? Where you're just like, oh, that damn Karen, look what she's doing there. Look at those ICE agents being pains in the asses. Oh God, I can't stand that. And you start scrolling and you get more rage bait, kind of thing. There were a lot of jerks in this part 2 of season 1, and it created a lot of rage bait. And next thing I knew, I was like, through episode 5, it was like 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning. I was like, I got to get up. I got to feed the cats at 6:30. So I kind of just parked it there, slept. Next night, I watched the other 3 episodes, and that was it. Kind of finished it off. And I was thinking about, this was last week that I did that, so I was thinking about doing the episode last weekend, but I just didn't end up getting around to it. So we're doing it this weekend anyway. But it's not like it's that 1 week would have mattered at that point. I was already this far behind on Daredevil Born Again. Everybody else had already posted about it that there was going to. So, but I figured I would do something. I wanted to talk about it a little bit, especially with the new Spider-Man movie coming around the corner, and with that Punisher one shot and everything. I thought we could put everything together and talk about it like that here on the DTVC Extra. I'm going to say this part 2 of season 1 was not very fulfilling for me. I wasn't a big fan of it, and I'm going to get into why it didn't work for me. Now, this isn't saying it's good or bad. It's just saying it didn't work for me and why it didn't resonate for me. And I'm sure as you listen to the reasons that I give, you're like, well, that wasn't what they were going for. That's perfectly fine. They can be going for whatever they want to be going for. The reality is whatever you're going for is not going to resonate with everybody. That's just, the reality. It's when I write my books, I can't remember the author's name, and I haven't been able to find the quote anywhere, but they were talking to him about the process of writing, and he said, Gertrude Stein had this mindset of, I write for an audience of one, me. And he was like, I don't even write for me. I write for no audience, because when you think about it, like the electric company, they write for an audience, right? When the electric company sends me a letter telling me to watch out for scams, that, they have an audience in mind. They have to structure things in a certain way. They have to kind of get information out in a certain way. But when you're writing, fiction, novel, thing like that, you write it just to write it. And if it does resonate with an audience, it does. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. And I think you can maybe say the same thing about TV shows, right? That you don't expect them to resonate with everybody. With that being said, I'm going to talk about why this didn't resonate with me. I think let's go back to the jerk factor, because, again, the jerk factor is really high on this. And I think there should be a distinction maybe between jerks and like baddies or villains, like Kingpin is a baddie. He's yes, he's not somebody that's nice. You want to see him get taken down. You want to see him be defeated. But, Vincent D'Onofrio plays him in a very compelling way. And yes, while I ultimately want to see him lose, I'm not like, my blood's not boiling every time I see him, right? He's not making smug, snide faces or anything like that. He's just being a villain. Artie Froshan, who plays Buck Cashman, he's just a baddie. He's not a jerk, right? And yes, I want to see him be defeated. I know he's doing bad stuff, but my blood doesn't boil when I see him. Contrast that with Hamish Allen Headley's Powell character, the head of the anti-vigilante task force, where he's just like sneering and making these smug faces all the time and brutalizing people. He is a fucking jerk, and he needs his comeuppance. He needs to get taken down a peg. One of the things about this kind of movie or TV show is the baddies need their comeuppance in some kind of way. It's why the guys that comeuppance name their site Comeuppance Reviews. A lot of people think, like I know, like Albert Pyun, when he commented on one of their reviews, they think that it's them giving the movies their comeuppance, and that's not what it is. They're talking about the baddies getting their comeuppance and celebrating, that strong element of action movies where the baddies get their comeuppance at the end. So, Albert Pyun, I think they gave one of his movies a bad review, and he's like, "Boy, I really got my comeuppance there," But that's not why they called it that. They called it because there's the satisfaction of seeing baddies get their comeuppance. And in particular, you want jerk characters to really get their comeuppance. And this Powell character, he needed it in the worst way. I mean, you think of like John C. McGinley in Point Break, right? I mean, his comeuppance, right? He gets punched in the face by Gary Busey. That was probably equivalent to the kind of jerk that he was to get a punch in the nose from Gary Busey. That's like equivalent to that. In this, this Powell character, he just gets an elbow to the head, and then he wakes up in jail, which we'll get to in a bit, is the same issue that happens to Daredevil, right? He also ends up in jail at the end. So it's like the jerk-off gets the same fate as our hero? What the fuck kind of idea is that? That's ridiculous. Now, when we talk about one final kill here in a little bit, or one last kill, I'm going to get that screwed up the whole time. I'm going to call it one final kill when it's one last kill. But anyway, we talk about one last kill here in a bit. One of the ways that he kills one of the mafia guys is he stomps his head into the pavement. That's the death that this Powell character deserved. You needed to bring in Punisher, and I'm saying bring in Punisher because we're going to get to something else in a bit here about the Punisher in this season, or lack thereof. You needed to bring in Bernthal and stomp this guy's head into the pavement. That's the only thing that would have worked for how much of a jerk-off he was developed as throughout this season. And yes, I think you can give credit to the actor, right, to Hamish Allen Headley. He does a fantastic job making this guy as much of a fucking asshole as he possibly can, that you want that kind of a death for him. But you can't build up that kind of a jerk-off and not give him that kind of comeuppance. He needs that. So that really pissed me off, that we don't get any kind of really good comeuppance for anybody in this. It's kind of suck. I mean, again, the only character who gets his comeuppance is Daredevil, right? He ends up in jail at the end. It's like, what the fuck is that? I mean, technically Kingpin gets taken down, but he just ends up chilling on the beach, which makes sense because he's a politician, and that's how you deal with politicians. You just send them away. They don't get prosecuted for their crimes. We saw that with Trump. That's just how that works. Yes, that kind of was more fitting, but still, if you're going to juxtapose that with Daredevil going to jail at the end, that's kind of shitty. Now, the other big jerk-off character was really a disappointment for me, and that was the Heather Glenn character played by Margarita, I think it's Levieva. So Heather Glenn, was in the comics, right? I mean, she's one of Daredevil's love interests, and so this character is based off of that character, and I was expecting a good story arc from her. But this entire part 2 of season 1, she's just a fucking jerk off. She's like, doing some kind of psych evaluation with Tony Dalton's Jack Duquesne, which I'm going to refer to him as Lalo Salamanca for the rest of this episode. So I don't want you to get too confused. Tony Dalton, Jack Duquesne, Lalo Salamanca, because that was his best role. I loved him as Lalo Salamanca. But anyway, she's questioning Lalo Salamanca about, him doing like his fencing and stuff like that. And then she's like lying on the psych evaluation, which is just an absolute jerky thing to do. And then she's questioning Karen Page when she gets busted, Deborah Ann Wool's Karen Page character, and she starts slapping her and shit like that. It's like, she's a fucking jerk. And the Heather Glenn character deserved better than to be a fucking jerk. That's, and I don't think it's fair to the actor either, because she's just going based off what the writing is for her character. She has one kind of cool moment with Buck Cashman where there's a sort of like an autoerotic asphyxiation get scene. Yeah, I'm having trouble talking today, so that's gonna be so that one's a mouthful with my New England accent. But anyway, that was one kind of cool scene with them. But for the most part, she's just a jerk. And then at the end, they're like, "Oh, she's putting on the Muse mask, so she's gonna be the Muse." It's like, who gives a fuck? She was a jerk, you know. And jerk off characters, like in her case, I don't think she deserved the same fate that I wanted for the Powell character. I think Frank Castle, boot to the head would have probably been a little rough for this situation. But I think, bullet between the eyes from Karen Page, probably, she's like trying to attack her or something, probably would have worked well enough. You can't make a character a jerk and then expect some kind of redemption arc. Now, I think for me, the best thing that would have happened for that character, for the Heather Glenn character, is you make her separate from the Kingpin in this part 2 of season 1. And instead of having her be a jerk to people like Lalo Salamanca and Karen Page, you have her wrestling with what she's dealing with after being attacked by the Muse at the end of part 1 of season 1. I think you kind of go through that and have these moments where she's dealing with other patients and things are starting to creep in and, that kind of thing. I think you take her away from the Kingpin and you take her out of this. And I think that allows you to build this nuance and gets it to this point where she becomes not a jerk, but she gets to be the baddie that she's supposed to be, which she's taking on the Muse character. I think this other stuff was just too jerky, and it just jerks don't work in this kind of thing. They need full comeuppance, and so I think that's a big part of this is that the jerks don't get their comeuppance. And it's almost like the show didn't understand how. I mean, they had to have known how big of a jerk the Powell character was. I mean, he's just sneering and like smug the whole fucking time. Like they had to know what that was about. And the fact that they knew what he was about and they didn't give us the satisfaction at the end of seeing him getting taken down. That's just a complete miss there. I don't know. And again, I don't know who greenlights this stuff. I understand that they were like, they had a whole different idea for how they wanted to do this. And then Kevin Feige came in. I don't know if Bob Iger was part of it too. And they just kind of retooled the whole thing. They fired the writers and brought in new writers to do all this other stuff. And I don't know if that's why this alt thing came off uneven or whatever. But I don't know. That again, you got to understand the difference between jerks and baddies. And when you have jerks in your movies or your TV shows or whatever, those jerks need some kind of comeuppance. They need something to happen to them. And this didn't have any kind of payoff on that. So that was really disappointing. I think the second one, and this is one that people probably will come to, disagree with me on. And that's fine. You're welcome to disagree with me on. But they teased that. They tease the Punisher, first off. I think that's a big piece of this. And maybe this Punisher one is a separate one from what the other ones that I'll talk about with the sort of overall connected Marvel universe that just gets discarded for this show. But the Punisher thing, they tease him at the end of part 1 of season 1, where he's in one of those little cages. He tricks this guy to let him free, breaks his arm, and then that's it. And then we don't see him again in part 2. He doesn't show up at all. He gets mentioned. His character gets mentioned, but he never shows up. He's never there. And the thing is, if you're putting Daredevil in this connected universe that you've been teasing to us for years that he's a part of, right? He was in Spider-Man No Way Home. He's in She-Hulk. Ms. Marvel's dad is in part 1 of season 1 here. So we're getting the sense that he's a part of this whole connected universe. And then suddenly you're just like, you know what? Well, we're going to tease the Punisher at the end here because, that's the whole thing with those post-credit sequences. They're teasing what's going to happen next. And to tease that and then be like, nah, actually, we're not going to use him in this. We're going to just use him for his one shot. That's totally fugazi. That's just ridiculous. You can't do that. Not with the way that this whole thing's been established before. We're expecting the Punisher and the fact that we don't get him. And people can say, well, they wanted it to be like a self-contained Daredevil thing and they just wanted him to kind of do his own thing, which, I guess, except for the fact that he's got Bullseye helping him. At the very end, he has Jessica Jones helping him, and that's like the very end, like the last couple episodes. But that happens at the end there. You've also got White Tiger, the White Tiger's niece, played by Camila Rodriguez. So she's essentially taking up the mantle of White Tiger and helping out at the end. So he does get help. Punisher needed to be there. But here's the other thing. We know who Frank Castle is as a character. We understand how he works. And especially this John Bernthal version of Punisher that we have seen through 2 seasons of his own show. we know who this guy is. And the one thing he would not do is leave a bunch of people behind in cages, a bunch of innocent people behind in cages and just escape on his own and be like, yep, deuces, see you later, fuckers. Like, that's not what he would do. He's the kind of person that would either save them there, which he could have done, or he'd come back for them and he'd get them. That's something that would weigh on him, leaving them behind. He doesn't leave people behind like that. That's not his character. So I think that's another thing too, is it did diminish the Bernthal character by doing that. And I didn't think they were going to do that. I didn't think that was something they were going to do. I thought he was going to help him rescue him. It ends up being like somewhere in the middle of that season that Daredevil rescues everybody when he helps Lalo Salamanca out, and they let everybody free, and then they all escape. And we hear from Lalo Salamanca that he's been in that little cage thing for 6 months, which just sounds insane. Like, that's just, you know what that is? That's like the third Christopher Nolan Batman movie, right? Remember when they had like the police department like buried in like a tunnel underground for like 6 months? And it's like, yeah, that's a little bit extreme. Like, it's just kind of ridiculous. Same thing they're doing here. It's just kind of ridiculous that you're having that, but also the fact that the Punisher would just leave them behind. That's not what Frank Castle does. So that was just, I don't know, it was bad writing. They wrote themselves into a corner there, I think, and then they just didn't know what to do with it. And they just sort of said, well, he's going through some stuff, and we'll see him in, One Last Kill. So yeah, you won't see him in this part 2 of season 1, even though we're going to tease it and make it look like he's going to be in part 2 of season 1, because we're going to do it exactly the way that we've done with all the other Marvel stuff, where we're teasing somebody going to be in something and then not have them. Whatever, right? So that was kind of fucked up that we didn't get Punisher at all in this. But the other thing is that, again, they've gone through the past however many years establishing that Daredevil is a part of this connected universe, right? So you remember, 2021, we see him in Spider-Man No Way Home. He shows up in She-Hulk. I mean, he's even having picnic with or having dinner or cookout or whatever with cousin Larry Appleton, who plays She-Hulk's dad. So we've seen him there. Again, they bring in Miss Marvel's dad in this. So they're really driving home the fact that Daredevil is part of this connected universe. Where the fuck is this connected universe in this show? I mean, She-Hulk couldn't come in to help at all. She's a lawyer, right? Wouldn't you think she'd gonna go and help? She'd probably be there to help out the Kirsten McDuff character, right? She'd probably go work at that law firm. And if the anti-vigilante task force shows up to try to give her a hard time, I mean, she's She-Hulk, right? Everybody knows who she is. She just beat the crap out of them. What are they gonna do to She-Hulk, right? So where is She-Hulk, right? Wouldn't She-Hulk be there for that? Kate Bishop, right? We went through. I completely forgot, right? The first one that establishes Daredevil as a part of all of this is Hawkeye, where we get Kingpin from the Daredevil show. Vincent D'Onofrio's Kingpin in Hawkeye. Kate Bishop, and obviously same, Jack Duquesne, Tony Dalton's Jack Duquesne character, Lalo Salamanca, that's where he first appears, is in Hawkeye. So where's Kate Bishop? Wouldn't she be there helping out, right? I think she could lend a hand and do all kinds of stuff here to help them out with this stuff. Apparently not, right? She's not around. Winter Soldier, right? He's hanging out, in DC, I guess? Is that where the Avengers are? Wherever the Avengers are. Or don't they have the Avengers Tower in New York City? Isn't that where they would be? It's his city, right? Winter Soldier grew up in New York City. That's his city. Wouldn't he care about what's happening there? But also, if the Avengers are based in New York City, aren't they going to be like, yeah, we're not doing this, right? We're not doing this whole Kingpin takeover thing, right? This whole anti-vigilante task force. And we also established that Kingpin is afraid of the Avengers. That was something that came up in Hawkeye. He was like, what? You've got an Avenger after me. When he was talking about Hawkeye, he's like, an Avenger's, after us? We don't want that. You can't, and I was talking with Mitch, the Video Vacuum, about this a little bit, and we were talking about maybe the need for more self-contained stories. And I think that could, yes, you could use some more self-contained stories. Because, again, by placing this in the greater Marvel Cinematic Universe, there's a lot of stuff that this doesn't address. I mean, nobody in this series talks about having disappeared for 5 years, right? I'm assuming a non-zero number of these people disappeared for 5 years, right? During the whole, in between, Infinity War and Endgame, right? So the fact that we don't nobody talks about that, and they're just sort of acting like it didn't happen, or acting like New York City wasn't destroyed by the Avengers or any of that kind of stuff. It's hard to do when you're putting this in that universe, and so I think there's a lot of stuff like that. But then again, they still made sure that this thing was connected to that universe, because you've got the whole, you've got Julia Louis-Dreyfus's character from Thunderbolts and some other stuff that she had done. She's mentioned in this because she's the one who's like the handler for Matthew Lillard's character. So, it just made it hard to believe that it's just Daredevil having to fight all these people by himself, right? Like, there should have been a lot of people here. This thing should have been taken care of within 3 episodes, and then it's just a matter of dealing with the aftermath. It should have just been a swarm of heroes coming in to help out and take the Kingpin down and free everybody out of those cages and do all that stuff. And I guess that's the problem, right? When you do this on this sort of interconnected scale, because I think when this series, that the Mayor of Kingpin, when it happened in the comics, it did involve all of the heroes. But I think he had like backing of supervillains or something. Okay, right, because it was Hydra. Hydra had infiltrated New York City. And so he was working off of that Hydra infiltration to sort of something like that. But also you did have heroes like Spider-Man who were also involved with this that they were hunted or that they were victims of this anti-vigilante task force. So, when it was done in the comic books, it was a much bigger scope, and they kind of took all of that on. And just watching it here, it was just like, what are we doing? Like, where is everybody? It's just Daredevil. And you kept thinking like, okay, this is where somebody's going to show up. This is where it's going to be the Punisher. This is where, Jessica Jones is going to show up. And it just wasn't happening. And meanwhile, I think they spent way too much time on the baddies. They spent way too much time on Wilson Fisk. I mean, this Powell character being a jerk-off. The Heather Glenn character being a jerk-off. They spent way too much time on that stuff. And I don't know. It just, a lot of that stuff just didn't resonate for me. It just didn't work. And I think, again, from a plot standpoint, I'm like, well, why is, it's kind of like when you watch The Mandalorian and you're like, well, why doesn't Grogu just like lift things up and move them away, right? Like, why doesn't he just get these things, get people out of these situations by using the Force? It's kind of a similar thing here, where you're just like, why doesn't he just call? Get on the phone and call. He's having no problem helping other people. Was he afraid of asking She-Hulk for help because he was afraid that that she was going to want to date him still or something while he's hooking up with Karen Page? It's like, maybe that, I guess that would be a reason enough, but She-Hulk probably could have helped pretty much, quite a bit, but see, that's the thing, right? You bring in She-Hulk and you bring in a whole different element of this, where you have like the whole scene of her flying out and it's kind of a joke because she can't fit on the seat or something like that, and you'd have like all that kind of comedic stuff, and that's the show didn't want to do any of that, so they kind of wrote themselves into that. I think they want to act like that never happened, right? That Matt Murdock never went out to L.A. and hooked up with She-Hulk. I think that's the thing that they kind of want there. They want to act like they know. I think they want to act like She-Hulk never happened. I think that's kind of the big thing. They want to act like there was no She-Hulk ever. Sorry, you can't do that. You did it. You created it. The reality is, they should have been doing more with She-Hulk. I think they could have, and that could have easily explained away her appearance. I don't know why they just sort of have abandoned She-Hulk, but that's just kind of what it is. So you got these two big problems. One, you've got this big jerk-off issue with the characters. But two, you've established that Daredevil is in this greater connected universe with all kinds of heroes. But then you act like he's isolated from them when he probably shouldn't be. And then you end the show with him getting arrested. And it's like, what the fuck? And maybe they've got some kind of payoff in part 3 of season 1, which it looks like they're possibly doing. I'm fucking tired of that bullshit. I want ends of things now. I don't need all these fucking like, oh, you know what? I don't have to bother with finishing off this story because I'll just finish it off with the next thing. No, give me a fucking end now. I need something wrapped up now. I mean, how hard is that? How hard is it to add? You had 8 fucking episodes. You could have ended it. Like, what are you doing? You had, what, 9 or 10, what is it, 10? I don't know how many episodes the previous season was. But, you couldn't end it there either. Like, what are you doing? Just be done with it. Just finish it and then start new with something else. The Netflix series, the thing with the Netflix series was, yes, they were like 13-hour episodes. And yes, that could be a little bit draining, where, especially when you get towards the middle of these, where every episode plays into the next one, it can get a little draining when you get to like, episode 7, 8, and you're just like, wow, we've been doing this for a while now, and I still got another 5 or 6 hour and 10-minute episodes to go. You get sort of like a Netflix fatigue thing that happens with that. But the one thing that those Netflix series did, each of those 3 seasons, was that they ended cleanly. There was a clean end. He takes down Kingpin in season 1. He and Elektra with the Punisher, they take down the Hand or whatever it is that they in season 2. I can't remember, Then Kingpin comes back in season 3 with Bullseye, and Daredevil finishes him off there and takes him out there. They ended cleanly on that. It wasn't like, oh, hey, so this is what we're going to do for next season because we didn't really feel like finishing this one off. And I guess to some extent they did do enough in the fact that Kingpin is taken down in New York City, right? That's enough of an end. But I needed like a legit end. I don't need Daredevil getting arrested at the end of season 1. Whatever this is, I don't need that. I don't know. It's just, what are we doing? It's like, and again, the fact that Daredevil gets the same fate as the biggest jerk character in the series is just so unfulfilling and just not, I don't know. So I'll be curious to see what they do next time around, but I just think from my standpoint, this just wasn't fulfilling for me. Now there are some bright points. I should point out before I wrap this and make it sound like the whole thing was bad. I think Charlie Cox is great again as Daredevil. He just works really well as Daredevil. I think, again, bringing back, Karen Page Deborah Ann Woll as Karen Page, another great one. Wilson Bethel as Bullseye, absolutely fantastic. I could definitely go for some more of him. He was great. Jennia Walton as BB Urick, I also liked her. And, Margarita Levieva, I liked her Heather Glenn in the first season. And again, I think in the second season, or whatever, the second part of first season, whatever I'm calling it, I think she was just working with what she was given for writing. I don't think it was her fault that it was bad. It just didn't come off. It didn't work. So there's some of those elements that I did appreciate. And of course, D'Onofrio is great as Wilson Fisk again too. That was good as well. So you had some things that worked in this. And so I don't want to say that the whole thing was bad. I don't know. From a writing standpoint, it just didn't work for me. It's just not the story that I necessarily would have wanted from bringing back Daredevil. And maybe that's just me. Maybe I was looking for something different, and maybe that's my problem. That's my thing to deal with. But again, I'm part of the audience, and this is how it landed for me, and it didn't work for me. I guess that's just kind of how it is. And I guess we'll see what happens when they move this character forward. But anyway, why don't we take a break here, and then when we come back, I will talk about Punisher: One Last Kill. My newest book, Mark in Sales, is available now. It follows Mark, who, over the last 10 years, has turned himself into the best possible salesperson he can be. And in that time, he's made his family rich selling cut-rate health insurance to companies that are either looking to save a few bucks or don't know any better. The problem is, he's missed out on the lives of his wife and kids, and the employees of those companies he's sold insurance to now have to deal with higher medical bills and the loss of previously covered providers. As Mark comes to understand the reality of the product he's selling and the toll his long hours at work have taken on his relationship with his family, his company gives him the promotion he's always wanted. Can he now throw away everything he's worked so hard for to make a career change? Mark in Sales takes place in the same world as Chad in Accounting and explores what it means to be an adult in modern society, from family and career obligations to making sense of a changing world as time passes more quickly. You can get it on Amazon and Kindle, Kindle Unlimited, and in paperback. The link is in the podcast description. All right, we are back, and we're going to be looking at Punisher: One Last Kill. So this was a 50-minute one-shot, or one-off, or whatever, 48-minute, whatever it was, one-off kind of deal where, Frank Castle, he's been dealing with post-traumatic stress from having fought in the wars. He's kind of trying to get over that, but he's having trouble. And then Judith Light shows up in a wheelchair, and she says, "Yeah, you know what? I understand your pain of having lost your wife and kids, because I lost my husband and my kids, and guess who killed them? You did, you motherfucker, right?" And she's like, and he's like staying in this this cheap apartment building in what's called Little Sicily, but the area doesn't look great, and he's like kind of in this housing project. And she's like, "Yeah, I've just sent everybody in here to kill you. There's a bounty on your head, and they're all going to start killing, so you better get ready." And so he goes into his apartment, and then all these, local thugs come in, and they just start coming for him, and he's got to take them all out, and it's just a good half hour or so of just, Frank Castle just, all kinds of different ways of killing guys, getting as many weapons as he can. He locks up his guns to start with, so he's got to like essentially get his guns from everybody else, and he's just disarming guys, taking their guns, shooting them, seeing how many bullets he's got left in the clip, taking those guys out, taking the next guy's gun, and moving on to the next one. It's a thing of beauty. It's the kind of thing that like, you know, like Spiro Rosados would just be like, oh, let's, or Chad Stahelski, Dare Prescott just be like, oh, let's just do this with John Wick, all right? We're just gonna, and I mean, what an amazing idea that would be for a John Wick kind of style thing, right? Or just be like somebody trapped in a building. I mean, the Judge Dredd, right? The Carl Urban Judge Dredd, was a similar kind of thing. The thing is, he's only in the building for so long, and then he's out on the street and he's doing his thing on the street as well, and he just runs through these guys. And then it's sort of like this thing where he has this sort of reawakening and realizes like, no, I should go back to being the Punisher. And he puts his suit back on. Now, there are some things about this that I didn't like. First off, we get a dog murder at the very beginning. Dog killings don't work. And that character doesn't really get the kind of comeuppance that's worthy of a dog killing comeuppance. I mean, he at least gets his comeuppance, I should say, which is more than we can say about Daredevil, right? That at least the character gets his comeuppance, but it's not really a good comeuppance for dog killing. When I used to read GQ in the early 2000s, because I was kind of, sort of getting a sense of who I was as a person, and I always loved, especially like the man on the street style things, and I kind of got a sense of how I wanted style. But I think my grandfather was one who got me into reading GQ, because I was getting a flight home from visiting him in Florida, and he was like, oh, I used to read GQ, you should check that out. So I started reading it, and then I got a subscription and just kind of, it was one of those things where it started off, I was like reading it and kind of following it, and then it kind of got into this thing where I was like, my friends and I would make fun of it, we'd go through it and get a kick out of it, and eventually it was like, man, even like at like a, $10 a year that they wanted me to re-up for, I was kind of like, is this worth it? Like, I'm just doing this to goof on it with my friends. But one of the things that they would do, this construction that they would have, is like, they would do these like style tip things, and they would always be like, don't wear your thing like this. You're not so-and-so. Like, don't wear your boots over your jeans this way. You're not Bruce Springsteen, that kind of thing. And I remember I was watching this YouTuber recently, Jarvis Johnson Gold, where he was doing he was making fun of, I guess, a more recent GQ thing. I guess like this past year, they did like 110 tips for how to be a good guy or something like that. I don't know. And they were still using that same construction. Don't do such and such. You're not so-and-so. Which blows my mind. I don't even know how GQ still exists. I mean, it was like in the late 2000s when I was like deciding like, I don't know why I still got a subscription to this. It was like out of touch. I mean, I remember I think somewhere around that, like maybe 07, 08, they had Kevin Federline as one of their Men of the Year. I mean, that's how ridiculous it had gotten. And it was always ridiculous, I should say. Because my friends and I remember there was one photo spread in like an 03 one where they had guys like doing blue collar jobs in like, like hundreds of $1,000 worth of thousands of dollars worth of like designer clothes. It's like, I think one of them was like a guy was like in an Hermes sweater that was like $3,000, like hauling lobster traps or something. Another one like got a $200-$300 D squared trucker cap while he was like working as a trucker. It was like insane. So yeah, I mean, it was out of touch then. But anyway, but all that to say, I think when you kill a dog, right? It's like one of those things where like, you're not John Wick. Don't go killing dogs in your thing. And I don't think this 50-minute, 45-minute deal, whatever it was, it had no business killing dogs. So I will use the GQ construction for that. You're not John Wick, don't kill dogs. And I think this is something we should tell everybody making movies. You're not John Wick, don't kill dogs. And even in John Wick, they interviewed the actor whose character kills the dog in John Wick, and he said it was traumatic for him. He would have to pet the dog between takes to remind himself that the dog was okay, and it was something like he said he would never do again. I think that like it was that traumatic to have to be the actor killing a dog. So don't kill dogs. Let's just not do that. Maybe we can all get together and talk about this and not kill dogs. And I'm going to go another side here. This brings up another point that I didn't bring up in Supergirl when I was talking about that. CGI dogs are perfectly fine. I am so happy with CGI. CGI animals in movies, I think, are great. Now, I get from time to time, maybe a dog might be a little bit better if you've got an actual dog or a cat. And, I think of like the Andy Sidaris movies where he had his own cat acting in the movies. But even then, do you remember, which one was it? Was it Guns? Which one was the one where they were, no, it wasn't Guns. I think it was the one after that where they're on the run from, or maybe was it Do or Die? Maybe that's what it was. They're on the run from assassins, and I think I'm trying to think. Yeah, so they're on the run from assassins, and they're in Louisiana, and the assassins are making their dinner at this place, and they feed the cat the fish, and the cat falls over and dies. Even that, I was like, oh man, the poor cat. Even though I knew it was Andy Sedaris's cat just playing a part, it's still like, I don't want to see animals getting killed in movies. And so CGI animals, I think we can use CGI animals all the time. How would I have felt if it was a CGI dog that got thrown in front? Because, obviously the dog didn't get killed, but he's still, the idea of throwing a dog in front of a garbage truck. If it was a CGI dog, I still would be like, no, you can't do that. I don't, I'm just saying, like, we don't need dogs on sets. We don't need dogs, with people yelling and, clapping action and all that stuff. Just let the dogs relax. Dogs should be able to relax. The dog's life, unless it's like a service dog, the dog really should just be, going out 3 or 4 times a day, jaunting around, or if you live in an area, it's probably better if you don't live in the city with a dog, if you live in an area where you can just let them outside and just let the dog jaunt around and be a dog. Like that's really what a dog should do. Same with cats. They don't need to be in movies. They can jaunt around. We've got the technology now. If Lucas can create a series of clone soldiers without having a single, and they're all computer generated, we can do computer generated animals. We don't need to have them in movies anymore. I think I'm okay with that. But anyway, going back to this. Okay, so that was the one thing that didn't work for me, was the dog killing. But otherwise, all of this was pretty fantastic. And it's the thing that gets Frank Castle back into this. Now, it doesn't make up for the fact that he didn't smash in that Powell character's head at the end of part 2 of season 1. I think we still needed him to come back for that. Just show up for one scene, Mr. Bernthal, pay him whatever he's supposed to get, and have him just stomp out Powell while he's on the ground, and that's it. Just call that good. There you go. We're done with that. And then you can, if you really didn't want to have him in part 2 of season 1, just have him do that. And then, so this doesn't make up for the fact that he's not there taking care of business in part 2 of season 1 of Daredevil Born Again. But it's still nice. It was still pretty fantastic. So I definitely love that. I definitely was a fan of that. And I think this is worth checking out if you haven't seen it yet. I think just even me giving away the dog murder happens at the very beginning, so if you want to skip it, you can. Again, that character doesn't really get great comeuppance at the end. He does get killed, so he does get taken out, but otherwise, that still, he's fantastic. We got Andre Royo from The Wire in this. He plays a shop owner with his wife and daughter. The daughter kind of recognizes that John Bernthal's Frank Castle is a nice guy. He's a protector. He's someone that can protect them. And I thought that was really cool as well, which again makes it all the more diminishing of his character, that he leaves a bunch of people stuck in little cages at the end of part 1 of season 1 of Daredevil Born Again. Because the fact that he's saving all of these people, that he comes in and he saves Andre Royo and his wife and daughter, that's who Frank Castle is. And I think the fact that we get to see that in full effect here, I thought that was really great. And again, someone like an Andre Royo, he's always great. He's obviously great from The Wire. I still got 2 seasons left of The Wire. I got to do season 4 and 5, but at least up through season 3, he was fantastic. And so I'm always happy to see him in something. So that worked well. Also, Judith Light. Come on, who's the boss, right? How do you not love seeing her as the baddie, right? And I'm kind of curious to see what they do with that, how that goes. But I think this was kind of more setting him up in Brand New Day, the Spider-Man movie, which he's going to be in that. But this worked. This worked for me. So now this brings up a whole different topic here, and I think this is important to discuss. Is I think between this and Werewolf by Night, and I think you could even make a case for the Christmas special, but definitely this and Werewolf by Night. By the Christmas special, I mean the Guardians of the Galaxy Christmas special. These one-offs, these 45-minute to an hour one-offs, are really a nice deal from Disney+. And I think this is something that they could be doing a lot more with. I think they could pull back a little bit on the TV series, pull back a little bit on the movies, which they are pulling back on the movies. I think you could get away with, again, this year you've got 2 big ones. You've got 2 big tent poles, right? You've got Spider-Man, you got Avengers. Inside of this year, though, you could have had a couple more of these one-off things from 45 minutes to an hour that cover a vast, array of different topics. The one that I want to see, the one that I think would be the most fantastic, is Wesley Snipes' Blade and Thomas Jane's Punisher put together as if they're in the same universe, and the two of them go off and do some kind of thing together where, like, like maybe the episode start, or the, whatever is the 45-minute, the hour thing, it starts with Thomas Jane killing some guy, and then, he gets back up and Blade comes in and stakes him, and he's like, yeah, they don't, and then it becomes this whole conversation, and they got to go and take out this big, like, it's like a vampire who also happens to be a crime boss, right? Like, like maybe like he's Russian, of course, right? I mean, you got to be Russian, right? Eastern European vampires are fantastic. A lot of raves, right? We can take it back to 2000 and have a lot of raves and stuff like that. But that's the thing. Put together, say that Punisher and Blade are in the same universe. And to be fair, you could stretch this thing all the way out, right? Now, granted, some of them, everybody's getting older. Nick Cage is getting older. Obviously, because you hear where I'm going with this, right? I'm saying not just Punisher and Blade together, but then you bring in Ghost Rider, you bring in Daredevil, you bring in Elektra. You could have them all in the same universe, right? They all could be doing stuff together and fighting and things like that. One of the things I talked about with Mitch from the Video Vacuum is the idea of Morbius. Now, you could have it be the Jared Leto Morbius from the Spider-Man thing, or you could create a new Morbius. But remember, the whole idea with Blade 2 was that they wanted Morbius, and Marvel said, no, we want to do something else with Morbius, and they ended up packaging Morbius with the rest of the Spider-Man stuff to Sony. But, I mean, could you maybe do something with Morbius now? Could you bring him back in this? Could you do a Marvel, Sony, like, collaboration thing like they do with Spider-Man with Morbius and some of these other characters? I mean, who wouldn't want to watch Thomas Jane and Wesley Snipes as the Punisher and Blade, like, doing something for 45 minutes, for an hour or whatever? Like, people would love that. That would be so fantastic. And yes, I'm getting a little crazy by bringing, I mean, yeah, after that one, have them go to the Romanian and meet up with Ghost Rider. How fantastic would all of that be? But yeah, I think that's one piece of this that they could be using these for. They've got the rights to a lot of this stuff now, and so they could be doing stuff like, Daredevil and Wolverine really tapped into something that a lot of us, kind of, there's not just a nostalgia thing, but kind of like, there's almost like this feeling of like when those characters were siloed in the early 2000s and they weren't really together, we were wishing that we could get team ups like this. And they're going to do more with those characters, right? We saw that Gambit is fighting against Shang-Chi in the trailer for Avengers Doomsday. So yeah, that's fantastic. But, could we do something like this? And, if the whole idea with Doomsday is that they're going to kind of get rid of all these various timelines and make it all one thing or something like that, that's fine. You still can do stuff with these characters. They don't have to be inside some kind of, it could be its own thing with them. But I do think that that's one way that they could really utilize those 45-minute, hour long things there. I think another one would be to do like, when I collected comic books, you would have different artists and different writers doing their own take on characters. And I think that's something that Marvel could explore more with these 45-minute to hour one-off kind of things. Like, in Daredevil and Wolverine, they kind of tease the idea of Henry Cavill as a Wolverine. Why don't you just do it? You could just do Henry Cavill as a Wolverine, and whoever you put in as a baddie or whatever, you could do any number of things with that. But it could be like this one-off, the same way that, like, Sam Keith drew Wolverine different from, say, like Jim Lee, or it's a different version of Wolverine. And again, in these one-off kind of scenarios, it doesn't have to be connected to anything. It can be self-contained, but it could just be us seeing a different interpretation of these characters. And again, I think it's a way that could sell. I think it would sell better than a whole TV series. I think the other thing is you could bring back characters that have kind of been lost. You could do a one-off with She-Hulk, which, again, I think She-Hulk works better as a continuing, as an ongoing series that's just sort of like a Monk or a Psych for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I think you could just keep doing She-Hulk, 10-episode seasons, half-hour episodes, year after year, and I think that would work. I think they were just too afraid of, I don't know what they were afraid of with that series. Maybe it just wasn't getting the streams they were expecting. I think you could build an audience with that. I think the same thing with Ms. Marvel. I think you could do multiple seasons of her sort of getting to know herself, her heritage, and her powers. And instead of having to like shoehorn her in with Captain Marvel, they could have done more stuff. But I still think you could do like one-off episodes with them as well. So I feel like this one-off episode thing, this is only the third one of these. But they've had a long time to do them. I do feel like this is something that has untapped potential for them. And I think that hopefully the Punisher one shows the power of these and we get more of them. But I don't know if we'll get the ones that I want, right? I don't know if we'll get Thomas Jane and Wesley Snipes teaming up. Tell me that wouldn't be the most amazing thing ever. Wouldn't that just be fantastic? Oh, I would love that, And then throw in Ghost Rider. I mean, what was it? Was it Hearts of Darkness it was Punisher? It was Punisher. Wasn't Blade, or maybe it wasn't Blade. It was Punisher, Wolverine, Ghost Rider, and Daredevil. I think was that who that foursome was. But I mean, what is it? Was it? I can't remember what they called it. They had a few different ones. Like Marvel Knights was one. Sons of Darkness or something like that. I can't remember. There's because I know that they were talking about wanting to, what they wanted to do with Blade. They have a few different ideas of what they want to do. And I guess that's the other thing, right? Is that I think they're afraid of running into this issue that DC had, where they had the Arrowverse, and especially you had Grant Gustin's Flash character that everybody loved, and then you've got Ezra Miller's Flash. There's my New England accent coming out there, Ezra Miller. But Ezra Miller's Flash, that everybody didn't like them, right? They weren't a big fan of Ezra Miller, and I think DC didn't understand how those the stuff that they were up to was affecting the perception, and I don't think that I don't know. I think DC thought that stuff just wasn't a big deal, and it really was, and I think that really hurt that character too. But I think there was also the fact that people had fallen in love with the Grant Gustin character. They weren't really keen on Ezra Miller's version of Flash, and I can understand that. Like if you keep bringing back, especially Wesley Snipes, I think you could get away with Thomas Jane because Bernthal has so established himself as the Punisher in the MCU that if we got Thomas Jane back as a one-off, people would appreciate it as a one, or even if it was like multiple 45-minute hour movies, people would still appreciate him as a different Punisher to what Bernthal was doing. But I don't. Was Mahershala Ali? Is that who they want to do Blade in the MCU? I do think, right. I guess if you bring in Wesley Snipes now, people are going to want him and not Mahershala Ali, and that could be that. Right, that could possibly be an issue there with that. I think the other thing is like if we brought back Ben Affleck's Daredevil, I think again Charlie Cox has so established that Daredevil in the MCU that we would be okay with it. I don't know, with Elektra. So was it Elodie Young? Is that who played her on the Netflix series, and then also the Defenders, the miniseries that she was in, versus Jennifer Garner? I think people would be okay with Jennifer Garner plus whoever else, if it's Elodie Young or whoever they want to play Elektra in that. But I think the big one would be Blade. They're trying to sell a new Blade, and here comes the Wesley Snipes one that everybody loves. I guess that would probably be the one reason why they wouldn't want to go with that. But man, how awesome would that be? Just give me that. Just pump it right in my fucking veins. I'd be all over that. And I think that's one of the things that's interesting because they're going through this period now where they're slowing down on new movies. They're only putting out one or two a year. They're also kind of slowing down on TV shows. But these one-offs, I think the thing with the one-offs is that, one, you can produce a few of them a year, and you can have them you could have them be there for various audiences, right? So like, the Thomas Jane, Wesley Snipes team up one, that could be for like people my age and a little bit older who, were going to the movie theater in the late 90s, early 2000s, and we're big fans of this kind of stuff. You could do that for us, right? And then I think you could do maybe for younger audiences that really like Ms. Marvel or really like She-Hulk, you could do something for them. And I think you could do like the Henry Cavill Wolverine story thing and see what happens with it, see what people think of it, see if it. And the thing is, if you put it on Disney Plus and you let it linger there for a bit, it could build its own audience and see who takes it. And I don't think there's the same kind of budgetary commitment that you have with these shorter one-offs than you would have with. When you do Ms. Marvel, or you do the Marvels for like whatever it was, $250 million plus probably another $100 million in advertising and whatnot, if that doesn't pull in $1 billion, you're screwed. But if you do, I don't know what this Punisher thing costs. I don't know if they put the budget on IMDb for something like this. But I don't think it costs that much to make. I mean, it obviously wasn't going to cost, it's not going to cost in the, 100 millions, right? It's not going to cost that much to make something like this. So you're not out that much money. And the question is then you're going to see, okay, well, how much do, how many subscribers do we get? How many streams do we get? Yeah, I feel like it could be a low cost way to kind of get people back in. But the thing, what you get people back in is that when you go to watch something on a streamer like this, it's similar to like when I was, when I first started the site, or when we were kids and we'd rent things, you get all the trailers that would make you want to watch other things. Well, now instead of trailers, it's suggested things. So it's like, okay, I watch this one-off from The Punisher. Oh, what other things should I watch? So like I could watch the Thomas Jane Punisher and then be like, hey, check out the John Bernthal Punisher. Check out this thing that we've got on Disney Plus. It could get me into watching more stuff. And I think that's the biggest thing, is they could start to kind of regrow their audience with these one-offs. So I feel like there's sort of this untapped resource for them. And maybe they're just starting to get the hang of how they want to use these. But I hope somebody's listening and is like, yeah, let's get Thomas Jane and Wesley Snipes on the phone and make that thing happen. Maybe call Nick Cage in the process too, because I'd love to see him as Ghost Rider in there as well. But anyway, I will say, I definitely, compared to the Daredevil Born Again, where I felt completely unfulfilled at the end of that, I was like, okay, yeah, let's go. Give me some more Punisher. When I got to the end of this, I was really, I definitely appreciated that. So, dog murder aside, again, you're not John Wick. Don't go killing dogs. But otherwise, this thing definitely worked for me. All right, we're going to have one more break, and then when we come back, I'm going to be talking about my book, Nadia and Aidan. Check out my newest release, Nadia and Aidan, available now. Told in a unique, dual first-person narration style, Nadia and Aidan explores what it means to be American from the standpoint of two kids who grew up in France with an American mother. It also looks at how we define family beyond DNA and blood relations, when life isn't always that simple. You can find Nadia and Aidan on Amazon in paperback, Kindle, and Kindle Unlimited. The link is in the podcast description. All right, we are back, and we're going to finish this by looking at my book, Nadia and Aidan, which came out in December of 2024. And I say book instead of novel because it was only about 60,000 words, which I guess puts it in novella territory. So it's not quite full-length novel. And part of that was just I used a sort of a unique dual first-person narrative because Nadia and Aidan, they play fraternal twins, and I kind of had them kind of working first-person together for a lot of the book, and I felt like I couldn't keep that kind of thing up, that sort of novelty, if you want to call it that, for a full-length novel. So that was why I chose it to that level. But it's possible because it's so short. It's outside of Chad and Accounting, it is probably the book I've had that sold the most, and I'm sure the size of it probably was a reason for that. It's only like I think 170 pages, 160 pages, something like that. So I think people see that short size and think, okay, I can handle that. I think the cover too, with my covers I make on Canva, I think a lot of people like that cover where we had the silhouette of a woman playing the saxophone, supposed to be Nadia, which in the book, she has much shorter hair. I kind of was working off the clip art that I had for Canva. And then the guy playing the trumpet, Aidan, he plays the trumpet. And then, of course, the outline of the United States behind them as they're traveling across the United States. And so I think people really like that cover as well. I started doing my own covers on Canva with the book before that one, Don's House in the Mountains. I kind of realized it because my first three novels, if you ever see, if you go on the site and you'll see some of the reviews that link to those first three novels, I didn't have any images, right? I just had the title and it was a blank, it was just, whatever color it was. It was black for Chad and Accounting. It was purple, I guess, for purple-ish for A Girl and a Gun, and then green for Holtman Arms, and that was it. But I was kind of realizing I need some images for the cover. I got to do something. I personally liked the idea of not having images on the cover. It kind of was something I liked, but people didn't. People were asking me about it. I was noticing they weren't selling as a result. So I started adding images, and I found Canva, and I found that their clip art worked really well, that I could put things together and make the kind of covers that I liked. And I started with Don's House in the Mountains. I had asked a friend if she could create a cover for me, and she created something, but it just wasn't what I was looking for. And then I found some of the clip art, and I was like, oh, this is exactly the kind of simplistic cover that I want. Think about the kind of covers that I like Philip Roth. If you look at his books in paperback, a lot of them are very simplistic. Like there's just like one or two images on the cover, and then it's kind of the title and all of that. And that's something I really like. It's just one or two images kind of put together. And that, and Canva really works well for that because there's a lot of clip art that I can kind of mix together and make what I want there. Bainbridge is the only one I didn't use clip art for. I drew that tie, and I'm still trying to work out what I want to do for the cover of the next one. So I kind of put together like some clip arts, like some pieces to make like a silhouette of a ninja, a female ninja, but I don't know if I'm going to go with that, but we'll see. But so Bainbridge, I actually drew that tie, and then I've kind of just stuck it on the covers. But yeah, so I guess, so maybe we'll get into where Nadia and Aidan came from after we get through the cover. But like I said, out of my books, because again, Chad and Accounting, I say other than Chad and Accounting, because when Chad and Accounting came out, I think the novelty that Matt had written a book for my friends and family was so big that they just all bought it, right? Everybody, I remember my mom bought like 15 copies of it. I remember like seeing, when you get the sales, you look on the KDP chart and you see the sales, and it's like, oh wow, how did I sell 15 copies? And then I was like, oh, I know how I sold it. And I asked my mom, she's like, yeah, I bought 15 copies. She bought, I think, 5 of A Girl and a Gun, and then she hasn't bought any since. And I think that's kind of the reality, is that for anybody out there, when you're doing something, whether it's writing a novel, making a movie, making music, right, putting out CDs, whatever it is that you do, your friends and family, that first time you do it, the novelty is going to be so huge for them that they're just going to be all over it. And then when you do it again, it's like, oh, okay, you did it again. And then at the third time, they're like, wait a second, is he just going to keep doing this? Do I have to keep buying these all the time? Like, no. I did it once. I supported it once. Now, and the thing that you kind of realize as well, though, I think, is that when you start off with that initial bump that you get from the friends and family, it gives a kind of a false sense of like how well these things are always going to sell. Whereas now I think I've kind of got a better idea, like I'm sort of developing a better audience now. So it's more people are coming that aren't just buying it because they're a friend or family, but because they want to read the book and they're curious about it. And then if they like it, they'll go back and read something else. But so Chad Accounting has sold the most just because of that. It got that bump. And I'll tell you, like, yeah, if you're, anything that you're creating, anything that you're out there doing, you're going to get that friends and family bump to start with. And I'm not saying that my friends and family don't support the other books. Like one of my sisters, she buys my books. She's always getting them and stuff like that. So it's like they still buy them and everything. It's just it kind of drops off a bit as you go. But yeah, so I'd say outside of Chad Accounting, Nadia and Aidan has done the best. And I think, again, the size had a part to do with that. I think people like the cover as well. The idea for Nadia and Aidan came in 06 when I was trying to still write my novel, 29. My friends turned me on to MySpace, and I noticed they had a blog function. And I started writing these free writes about this sort of like dandy like character in Boston who was like independently wealthy and essentially ran the city, and all these like capers or I don't know, these adventures that he would get into with his Norwegian companion Mads. And then it was like the Mayor McCheese was like some kind of like gangster type character in Chicago that was also causing issues for them that they would be involved with. And essentially what I did is I created a spin-off MySpace for Mads and then another one for the Mayor McCheese. And I've since kind of put all those together, and I'm trying to put them out now in a collection called Boston Stories. And I've replaced the Mayor McCheese with what I call the Baron Von Dieter, because I've replaced McDonald's with Von Dieters in my books. I did that because in Holtman Arms, there's a mass shooting at what was going to be a McDonald's. And I just thought, I don't know, I thought if their book ever got popular on any kind of level, that McDonald's wouldn't want their establishment to be involved in a fictitious mass shooting. So I just created my own. And creating your own versions of things actually is nice because you can do a lot of things with them. You're not sort of tied into what those things actually are. So I've kind of found that the key to a lot of things. I try to create my own versions of a lot of things just because it's easier for me to manipulate them and do what I want to them within the story. But speaking of Von Dieters, which was McDonald's at the time, the Mads character kind of towards the end, I would say like in 08, he decides to open his own McDonald's, which again becomes Von Dieters. And in the McDonald's, he does absurd things. Like he has a foie gras value meal, all kinds of ridiculous things. But one of the things about the Mads character is that he has a lot of kids living around the world. Like he's just impregnated a lot of women and he's got these kids, and he's, Norwegian aristocracy. So he's got unlimited money that he just pays out to their moms for child support or whatever. The other thing about him is that he's a Norwegian ornithologist, and he's got a Nobel Prize in ornithology, which doesn't exist, but it just kind of works, right? The fact that he's got a Nobel Prize in ornithology. But anyway, one day, the main character, the Boston character, is sitting home watching TV with this young woman, Gwen, that he's dating, who is a huge Captain America fan. So we refer to her as Gwen the Cappy or Gwen the Capper, right? We can't decide if it's Cappy or Capper for Captain America fans. But anyway, he's relaxing with her, and these two fraternal twins, Nadia and Aidan, show up, and they're looking for Mads. And they explain that Mads is their father. And so it turns out they're the oldest of his kids. And he, of course, puts them to work at his McDonald's / Von Dieter's, and they get stuck working for him. Those free writes, crazy things, I just kind of would do whatever I kind of thought would work in those free writes. They didn't really have a lot of rhyme or reason, but they were just kind of goofy things. And one of them, between one story and another, the main character goes to that McDonald's / Von Dieter's, and he sees Mads there, and they have a conversation and realize that Mads has been away for 3 weeks, and that Nadia and Aidan had been running the McDonald's or Von Dieter's for him for 3 weeks without him there. And the main character didn't realize that Mads had been gone for 3 weeks. He was like vacationing in Tortola or something like that. So in my head, I was thinking about, okay, I kind of like this Nadia and Aidan character. And I think it just came out because I think I saw the two names near each other. And I was like, oh, interesting. They're kind of anagrams, right? Like Nadia is Aidan spelled backwards, or Aidan is Nadia spelled backwards, one or the other. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool for fraternal twins. And I just kind of put them in one of those flash fiction pieces. But in my head, I was like, I kind of like the idea of doing more with them. And so I went through this sort of hiatus in my writing, similar to the hiatus with the site between 2014 and 2019, something like that. So remember the site, it was like 2015 to 2019. I really wasn't doing any work on the site, wasn't doing any podcasts or anything. My writing was something similar. It was more like 2014, and then 2018, I started picking my writing back up again and working on it. And I pulled together these ideas for what I wanted to be my next story. So just to give you a sense, so I'd written 29, and I was trying to sell it, and it wasn't really going anywhere. And in that period, I'd written Chad in Accounting while I was trying to do stuff with 29. And I realized now 29 was not a good story, and I've kind of been reworking it and hope to have it out this fall, which, started writing it like over 20 years ago, so it's good to probably finally have it out. But anyway, Chad in Accounting I had finished, and I was like, I had these ideas for other stories. And if you read Chad in Accounting, there's a period where Chad kind of goes into this like room at a strip club, and he meets these other characters, and then he wakes up like it was all a dream. And those other characters were other stories that I had in my head. So A Girl and a Gun, I was working on that idea. And that was actually originally supposed to be called 4 Women and a Girl and a Gun. They were supposed to be 2 separate stories where the main character, Justin, he's this writer in Boston, and he has these 4 women that he is in relationships with that kind of come and go, and then he, that's kind of the story. And then the second half was going to be this girl and a gun thing. It was kind of more of an adventure, and they were kind of just sort of be paired together. And then I came with this idea that actually, no, Justin writes A Girl and a Gun as a movie. And I had the script written as well, and the script just didn't look good in the story, but so it kind of is a little bit odd as a title, I think, because people see Girl and a Gun, they think it's like some kind of adventure. Hopefully they read the back jacket and find out, what it's about. But anyway, it was probably an odd title. But then Holtman Arms originally was supposed to be Justin finding the manuscripts of a writer who had died, a guy who was dead, and he's putting out his manuscript. And then I just decided, no, I'm going to do it, his own character, Colvin Hall, that I created. And then I had the ideas, again, for Don's House in the Mountains, which I wrote in April during the pandemic. Essentially, I gave myself a challenge. Can I write 4,000 words a day, each day for a month? And if I did, right, at the end of the month, I'd have 120,000 words, I'd have a novel. And I did do it, except that when I got to the 120,000 words, I wasn't done yet. That novel's like 150,000. It's my biggest book. But I had this idea that I wanted to do something with Nadia and Aidan as well. So as I'm collecting these ideas for what I wanted to write when I got back into writing, there was this sense of like, oh, Nadia and Aidan, what would I do with them? And so it's like, okay, there's that piece where they're in Boston. And what are they doing in Boston when they're visiting Mads? And I had this idea of like, okay, well, what if they're traveling the United States and Mads is in Boston is just one stop off? So then I kind of figured out, okay, I think I had written about how Mads had gotten their mom pregnant in Paris while he was going to the Sorbonne. So, okay, so that's the mom. What is the mom doing? Okay, the mom is working as, she runs an art gallery. So I came with this idea of like, let's say she's from America. Let's say she's from Philadelphia. I've been living in Philadelphia and South Philadelphia. So she's from South Philadelphia. And so then that's one place that they're going to go. So they're going to go to Philadelphia to meet their family there. And then I was like, okay, what if they start in Portland, Maine, where I had lived for a few years, and that could be the kind of the piece. And it was sort of this idea of them traveling to places that I had been to before. So it was, Portland, it was Boston, and then I had New York City in the middle, Philadelphia, then Vero Beach, Florida, where my grandparents lived. I used to visit them a lot down there, so that would be part of it. And then San Antonio, I'd gone there with my mom, actually, because my mom went to a nursing convention there, and I just quit my job, or was close to quitting my job in '09, and she was like, oh, my colleague canceled. Do you want to, take advantage, do you want to come to San Antonio and just, hang out or whatever while I'm doing this convention thing? I was like, oh, actually that'd be cool. I'd never been to Texas before, so that was kind of a cool thing. And, I got to see a lot of San Antonio, and she, my mom and I did some stuff there as well. Like we visited some restaurants and things like that. So I was like, okay, San Antonio would be another place. And then Leadville, Colorado, that's where I used to go hiking with my friend Mark, and we would stay in Leadville. So I was like, okay, that's another place for them to go. And then I figured Vegas, because I had just, gone to visit my friends in Vegas in 2013 and spent a week there and kind of really got a sense of that place. So that was the idea. And this sense of them, like, originally the idea was they were traveling the country and making a documentary. But then I thought, what if they played jazz and they sort of performed and paid their way across the country doing that? And so it was interesting because what I found was when I introduced this element of them playing jazz, so they start off in Portland. They play jazz at this. There's a Senegalese immigrant who lives in Portland who has his own like clothing store and like kind of knick-knack shop that sells like kind of high-end stuff. And it's based off a friend of mine, Kazim, who lived in Portland. He's originally from Nigeria, who had a shop similar to that. But I wanted to make them Senegalese, one, to distance themselves from Kazim so people wouldn't think it's so close to Kazim, but also because Senegalese, they'd be French, and the characters would be French. And then I realized as well, actually Senegal, that he could be originally from New York City. And then I sort of come up with this idea of who is this character, I can't remember, I think his name was Jean-Pierre. What's the deal with this character if he's from New York City? And that's when I was like, he's going to be working in the Twin Towers. And, I created a wife for him, Pia, who is a nurse in New York City. They moved to Portland in July of 2001. So he has this survivor's guilt because everybody he worked with dies in the towers. And that kind of became a thing where then when they go to New York, I kind of also, used 9/11 as part of that as well. And so as I kind of created these characters and kind of figured out what I was going to do with them, one of the things I kind of realized was that I couldn't use all the goofiness from those flash fiction pieces because they get ridiculous. For example, in the flash fiction ones, the Mayor McCheese shows up when Mads is running his McDonald's, and he kind of loses it on Aidan at one point because the Mayor McCheese is just kind of off his rocker, right? And I was like, how do I write that into this? And I realized, like, I can't write it into it. It doesn't happen in this the way it does in, so like that kind of those flash fiction pieces are kind of their own world, and we're just sort of pulling them out of it in some way. I do get absurd at the end, though. I do bring in the absurdity of Mads and the Boston friend at the end. They do something kind of ridiculous there. But yeah, it's one of those things. And so then it's a matter of like, okay, what are they going to do in each of these cities? Like, what can we do? So Vero Beach, I had introduced a character that Mads' son, Tristan, who Mads doesn't like that his name's Tristan, and he makes him go by the name DeBrickashaw after the football player DeBrickashaw Ferguson. And Tristan wants to have a relationship with his dad so badly that he agrees to be called DeBrickashaw, and he spends like 2 weeks of debauchery with Mads. And one of the things I thought that was really good about that was that so Mads is sort of this goofy, crazy character in the flash fiction pieces that you can kind of have fun with. But if you put Mads in a real environment where he's got kids and responsibilities and he's acting this way, it has a very destructive quality to it. So, so this Tristan character, he wants to have a relationship with his father, who's been absent all of this time. And instead his dad is doing things like his dad, Mads gets him an apartment in Boston and uses it as a flop house. And Tristan's only like 16 in this stuff, so, he gets into these crazy adventures that he probably shouldn't be in as a 16-year-old. They take him to a country music show to, hook up with cougars, just stuff like that shouldn't happen. And so in the context of these flash fiction pieces, it's goofiness, but in the story, it's more grounded, and he's like, I kind of realized, like, I don't necessarily need to have a relationship with him. Now, Tristan also appears in A Girl and a Gun. Tristan works at a record store that Justin goes into to buy his Bobby Caldwell records and doo-wop albums and things like that. So I do bring Tristan back because Tristan ends up going to Harvard because, Mads is a Harvard graduate, and so he can go there for free. So he does go there. But yeah, so Tristan will be in Vero Beach. That's the place that he lives, and that's where they meet him. So I kind of had come up with that idea. And again, Philadelphia, that's where their family is. And I figured, okay, let's have them be South Philly Italian, South Philly Irish, play up on all of that kind of stuff that I've been living in, for the past 10 years or so. And so that was part of it. And I also was kind of able to do some generational stuff there as well, because then Nadia and Aidan have like older cousins that are, the kids of their mother's older brother who they meet, who's like kind of really conservative. So you get some of those kind of elements at play there as well. So yeah, it was kind of fun to kind of do some of that stuff. And I don't want to give away everything that happens in every place because, again, there's things that, as they're going through the process of meeting people and learning about people, there's storylines that come up there. I mean, I think one of the big ones is when they go to Leadville. There's a whole thing with a Christian fundamentalist group that has a camp near, that they have like kind of a camp outing near Leadville. And that's the whole reason why they go to Leadville, is to work for their mother's friends who own a pizza place there. And so they were going to help out at the pizza place to earn their way to kind of, keep going across the country. But then Nadia meets some of the girls at that Christian camp, and they essentially tell her, that they're kind of impressed that Nadia is so not repressed sexually. And so they go on an outing to a sex shop, and she sort of is introducing them to certain things. So I don't get into a lot of details because I don't want to be voyeuristic, but it's kind of more just about her sort of helping liberate them in a way. And then it, of course, comes into conflict with the pastor who's running it, and all that happens. At the same time, there's a character that's kind of roughly based off of the lead singer of Berlin, and she is living out in that area of Colorado, has a nice place, and she hires Nadia and Aidan to play at her event, and then they see how good Nadia and Aidan are at performing, and they end up just, the people that are there perform with them, and it kind of brings her back to like wanting to play music again. And so and I think it's one of those things where I think I maybe just heard, Take My Breath Away by Berlin or something like that, and thought, oh, it'd be interesting, because I knew the story about the band. Like I knew how Take My Breath Away kind of broke up the band because they didn't write the song. Now what I did is I changed it so that this Carrie, was it Terry Nunn? Was that her name? Terry Nunn was the lead singer. I think I called her Nan Barry in the book. She in my book, instead of it being that the whole thing wasn't written by Berlin, it was that she co-wrote the song with the guy who did the soundtrack, and that kind of breaks up the band. But it's a similar idea, and I think I just had that idea in my head, like, oh, I'm listening to Take My Breath Away, and I know that broke up the band. And as I'm writing the story, I'm like, oh, that could be an additional piece to this chapter here. And then, when they go to Las Vegas, of course, my direct-to-video movie watching thing, there's a point where they perform, they play the witches in a Macbeth action movie remake, where I've got this action character, Chris Kenner, who he makes an appearance in Holtman Arms as well, but he's like a former kickboxer who does direct-to-video movies. And Nadia and Aidan find out that they're not going to meet Chris Kenner because he doesn't do his reverse shots. He doesn't act with any of the actors, right? Just kind of like a Steven Seagal. So I kind of pull some of those things from my own experiences with some of that stuff. Now, I think, as I'm developing those characters, Nadia and Aidan, there is a sense of sort of like, okay, I'm not French, I'm French descent, but it's not Parisian French, it's Quebecois French. So it's like having to find a way to make them authentically Parisian when I don't necessarily know that. That was something where I was just kind of I would write them and be like, does that sound like how they would talk about that or how they would do that? And of course, they're going to be influenced by their mother being American as well. So that's, another piece that I had to kind of add to that. But yeah, I think the one thing about the story as I was reading it is that while I was thinking of an America in 2008, because that's where this takes place, in 2008, because that's when I wrote the original pieces that this was a part of, was in 2008. So to have them be in 2008 as 20-year-olds traveling the United States, I had to kind of think back to what America was at that time. But at the same time, you could draw a lot of parallels to what America was then and what it is now. It wasn't so different. It was just that, you couldn't get away with as much back then as you can today, right? You couldn't say the kind of things that maybe like an Elon Musk says, or there was a lot more coded language, back then than there was today. But you still could use a lot of that stuff, and so I think that's one of the fascinating things is that I tried my best to kind of make what you see in 2008's America a harbinger for what you see today, even though they're talking about things like, Barack Obama's going to get elected. They kind of, at this point, they know that it's going to be him and not Hillary. And so then they're pretty sure he's going to win, right? There's a sense that he's going to beat McCain or whoever it was he was running against. It was McCain at that time. And sort of like the hope of what this could mean if Barack Obama gets in office, like what that could possibly be. But there's still a kind of underlying feeling of what America is at that time that's still similar to what it is today. I don't know if I brought them back and had them travel, again in 2008, what that would look like. But I definitely think, as an American, I've always wanted to play with this idea of an American heritage. I think it's something that we don't think about enough in America. We think of ourselves as Americans, right? We understand ourselves to be Americans. But when you ask somebody what they are, I'm part French and part Irish, right? With, my great-grandfather's Ukrainian or something like that. Like, that's what we think of as ourselves. I don't think I'm 100% American necessarily. But if I was to travel, right, if I were to go to France or something like that, I'd say, oh, yeah, I'm an American, But I would be like, oh, but my last name's Poirier, right? Not that would mean anything, right? Like, who cares? Do you speak French? I don't know. So, what does it matter? But we don't always think about, like, an American heritage that, like, if I had kids and we grew up in Spain or France or whatever, that we could come back to America, or rather they could come back to America, right, after they're grown up, when they're 20, 21 or something like that, and come here and sort of get in touch with their American heritage and sort of understand that background and who their mother was who decided to move to Paris. Now, the reason why she moves to Paris, we find out, is that she has an argument with her father, who's sort of like this old school Italian from Sicily who moved to America as a real hard ass. And she dates a black man in the 70s, and he doesn't like that. And the ensuing fight, she takes whatever money she has and she just goes off to Paris, and that's it. And part of the thing is that the grandmother, when the grandfather passes away, the grandmother assumes that her daughter with her two kids were just moved back to America into Philly and, be none the wiser. And I think that's one of the things about South Philadelphia is that there's a sense that, like, when you're here, this is where you belong, right? You should be in South Philadelphia. And she would think, well, now that my husband's passed, my daughter will come back here. But no, that's sort of not what happens, right? That the mother has an art gallery out there, and she's, that's where she's put her roots. She wants to be in Paris. And so that the kids, when they come to America, they sort of have this understanding of how race plays a part in America. And obviously, I talk about a little bit of how they feel about it in Paris as well, and in France. But seeing it in play in America, I think, is something that they also sort of. They're sort of kind of understanding it as part of their own history as humans, and why their mother encountered their father, why she was in Paris to begin with, and then coming to America and sort of seeing what it really looks like here. It's just I hope it I feel like it kind of worked out. And I think the other thing, of course, too, is that dual first person narration where sort of like Nadia would do a line, then Aidan, Nadia and Aidan, and so the hope is that for that, when people read that, they kind of blends. And they kind of become one voice in a way, but yet still a little bit separate, that and you kind of get a sense there that, like, who is speaking, who isn't, but at least you can kind of, and a lot of times I think for me, if I really needed it to be necessary that you knew if it was Nadia or Aidan who was giving a thought, I would make that clear. Otherwise, if it didn't necessarily matter, and I think that is something that I'm trusting that the audience would be okay with. I mean, again, this one sold better than other books of mine, so maybe people were okay with it. But that is one of those things when you write in a sort of an experimental style like that, trusting that the audience will be okay with it. And I think this goes back to this idea of not writing for an audience, just sort of writing the way you want it to be written and seeing if the audience finds itself. And it's possible that it's maybe not so much about how you write write a book, but if you've got a good cover and it's not too long, maybe that's the key. And I don't want to be too cynical about it, but it's possible that might be part of why something might sell better than something else. But I do hope it was something that people resonated with, that they appreciated. I mean, it did get a 5-star rating, so somebody did really enjoy it. But I hope that's something that people resonated with. Now, the other thing that I did, and this is sort of a rule about novels that I broke, and I had a prologue and an epilogue. And you're not supposed to have either. You're not supposed to have you're supposed to just start with chapter 1, and then end it on the last chapter. The reason why I did the prologue and the epilogue was that I wanted a chapter at the beginning and at the end that just isn't a regular third-person narration. So we're introduced to Nadia and Aidan while they're going to a film class in Paris with a film teacher who wanted to be the next Jean-Luc Godard in the 60s and 70s, and now is teaching a film class, as an old man in Paris. And I wanted people to get a sense of who they were before they start taking on the narration of the story. And I felt like if I start the book that way, I needed to end it as well. And so I end it with them bringing the documentary to their teacher so he can see what they were talking about. And the teacher's just kind of like, boy, I don't know. Americans scare me. And you're kind of critical of Americans. So I don't know if you should put this out there. And we don't really find out what happens with that. We don't find out when they put the documentary out, like what ends up coming of that. But for me personally, I felt like it worked better with a prologue and an epilogue. And then just having everything in the middle. And it's not a long prologue or epilogue. It's only a few pages each on either side. But I felt like using this experimental style, I thought it would be good to do this. Now, Kurt Vonnegut, he wrote an article one time where he talked about all the rules that you need for writing. And then at the very end, his last rule was to break all the rules. So I think that is one of the number one things about writing. So I think it's important to break rules. I think, one of the ones I always see from Stephen King is that you should never use ly adverbs, right? You should skip them. Same token, I read Willa Cather's writing, and she writes with ly adverbs all over the place. Now, Stephen King might say, well, I'll never write as well as Willa Cather. Most of us aren't going to write as well as Willa Cather, especially the kind of characters that she writes and the kind of character-driven stories that she writes. Stephen King, he's got some great books, but he's not going to touch, Oh Pioneers, My Antonia, Death Comes for the Archbishop, right? Those are 3 top, 100 novels of the 20th century. So Willa Cather, it's interesting, right? Would you rather have Willa Cather's career where she, did well and has these all-time classics, or, Stephen King's career with his bank account? I guess if you're me, I'll take whatever, right? I'll take whatever I can get. But for me, when I write, I think there are some times that you should have an ly adverb. They're there for a reason, and they do serve a purpose. The thing is, if you write with too many ly adverbs, because they all sound with that ly sound on the end, it has a similar effect of having repeating words, right? And I'm always like, when I'm always going through my writing and proofreading it, I'm always looking out for when I'm repeating words. Certain words you don't want to be repeating, especially nouns, right? You don't want to keep using the same nouns over and over again, that kind of thing. You want to be careful of that, because it's when things start to get repetitive, they don't sound right. And ly adverbs end up having that same feeling. You'll notice too, if you look at like sort of like hacky social media posts and things like that, where people tell this story of like, oh, my daughter encountered this, and they start telling, and they try to be overly sentimental or whatever. It's all kinds of ly she looked seriously at him, and she was questioningly, whatever, it's that kind of thing. It can hurt the writing as well. But again, none of these rules are absolutes, right? You should always, when you're writing, you can break the rules as long as you can do it well. And I guess that's the question with me, trying to do an epilogue or prologue and an epilogue. Did I write the rest of it well to get away with it? And, I guess it's a matter of, if you want to read it and tell me what you think, see if I did pull it off or not. But it was a really fun book for me to write, though. And I think, again, being an American and sort of setting this up as 2 foreign characters and try to reflect my own culture and heritage back at me through my writing, through these other characters, was a really great experience to sort of try that out. The other thing, of course, with Nadia being my first person, so first person, I really tried to write a female character in first person. And again, I hope I pulled that off. It's something I'm trying now with some other books, and I know that can be a very tricky situation. There are some people that don't want to ever read a male character writing from the standpoint of a female first person character. But I know for me, I think one of the characters that I've had in my first few books, Elaine Laughlin, I felt like she needs her own book. I felt like she's a writer of the same caliber as the other three writers in my author cycle with, Justin and A Girl in a Gun, Colvin Hall and Holtman Arms, and Don Veazey in Don's House in the Mountains. Elaine Laughlin's been in all three of those books as a major character. I felt like she needed her own book, and it felt like the fact that I shouldn't be writing, and she's a lesbian as well, so writing a lesbian female character, maybe, I don't know. It's one of those things that, like, maybe I shouldn't be writing that character, but I also kind of felt like she needed her own book. And so I did write a book. It's in a rough draft form. It probably won't be out for a couple years, but essentially in that book, she has two older brothers who die during the Delta variant part of the pandemic, and also a sister-in-law. One of the brothers' wives also dies, and they're like total MAGA types, right? So they're anti-vax, right? They don't wear masks, all that stuff, and then they catch the Delta variant and die. It's kind of the whole Herman Cain Award thing, and that was really where the inspiration for it came from. And so she travels back to Boston, and she's sort of treated like an abomination by them, but yet she's paying for their kids to go to college. She's paying for their medical treatment, for their funerals, for all of this stuff, and she's sort of coming back to kind of get back to her Boston roots and her getting back in touch with some of the family that she hadn't seen for a while because she had been estranged from these siblings, these older siblings. And so, I hope it comes off well. I hope it works, but, you never know, right? People might not like it. The other one is this character, Noelle Devon, who she appears, right, in Holtman Arms. And I kind of like the idea of her being in a book. And she's the only one who's appeared in both the Chad and Accounting and Mark and Sales universe, and the other universe that, like, Holtman Arms, just A Girl in a Gun, and Don's House in the Mountains. She's the one who's appeared in both universes, and I kind of wanted to sort of bring those two universes together through her, and also the Bainbridge universe is its own thing too. So I kind of had some fun ideas with that, but again, it's one of those things, like, as a male writer, should you be writing from the standpoint of a female first-person character? One of the writers that I draw from a lot for that is Iris Murdoch, because I thought she always did a really great job of writing from the standpoint of male characters. And so I try to do like what she did, kind of, maybe not in reverse, but try to work from the same mindset that seemed like that she wrote in. So she's a really great author. If you haven't read any Iris Murdoch, I suggest, Under the Net is fantastic. The Sea, Don's House in the Mountains is based somewhat on The Sea. So, that's one that I've always really appreciated. So she's an author that I always work with. And I think, again, that's the thing with Nadia and Aidan, is that was another thing that I hope came off well, that I was, one of my two protagonists was a woman. It was the first time I'd written from that standpoint. I hope it came off okay. But, it's possible people read that and go, yeah, no, you don't know what you're talking about. You shouldn't even try doing that. So, that's another question about this, that, depending on what people think when they read it, they might appreciate it or they might not. I'm realizing I've gone over 30 minutes talking about it. I went longer on Nadia and Aidan than I went on either Daredevil Born Again or Punisher One Last Kill. So, One Last Kill, One Final Kill, one of those things. Anyway, so maybe this is a good time for us to wrap it. Now, in terms of what we're thinking about doing next for DTVC Extra, I am looking to do probably like the Marvel backdoor pilots, I guess you could say, or unused pilots, unpicked up pilots or whatever, because, again, that just seems like a cool idea to kind of work with that. And then I noticed not only are all the Terminator movies, except for, I think, Salvation, are available on one of my streamers, but also all the Rocky movies are on Netflix. So those are a couple series that could maybe, use the DTVC Extra treatment. So maybe we'll go back to every other week for DTVC Extra and keep, doing that again. So we'll see. We'll kind of see what how time works for me, but I would like to get back into doing it, because I like getting on the mic like this. I think there are a lot of things that people like to do as sort of creative outlets. I think for me, getting on the mic seems to be the best. When it used to be writing, I still like to write, but it does feel like writing a second blog post every week feels more daunting than just popping on the microphone for an hour and a half. I don't know why. Maybe it's, who knows? I don't know. This is always just kind of fun for me. So that's why I appreciate it. And I appreciate you indulging me as I do this kind of thing. But why don't we wrap this here? So Nadia and Aidan, I'm going to have the link in the podcast description so you can pick that up. Also, the link to my authors page is in there as well. So you can click on that, check out any of my books. Obviously, dtvconnoisseur.blogspot.com. That's the site. That's where you can find links to everything on there. The podcast, the YouTube channel, it's all there. So if you want to check out anything that we're up to, definitely take a look there. And then on the main podcast, stay tuned this Tuesday. Sean Malloy from I Must Break This Podcast is back. We're going to look at the second of 3 Ernie Barbarash films. We'll be looking at 6 Bullets. Ernie Barbarash and Jean-Claude Van Damme films, I should say, because Barbarash has done a lot of other movies. But the second of 3 Van Damme movies that he did, 6 Bullets. And then the next episode of the DTVC podcast after that, so 2 weeks from this Tuesday, Mitch from the Video Vacuum is on. We're going to be looking at Fateful Findings, Neil Breen's movie. So we're going to dive into the Neil Breen pool. So stay tuned for that as well. I'm excited. We already recorded the episode. It was a lot of fun, but I'm excited for people to hear us chat about Neil Breen as well. But anyway, thank you for listening, and we'll be back soon. Bye, everyone.
Direct to video.